The conflicts in the Middle East seem never-ending. Wars, territorial disputes, and religious rivalries continue to devastate generations, leaving a profound mark on the history of humanity. But what lies behind this unending storm? Is it merely politics or economics? Or is there something far older, something that transcends the boundaries of time and space, shaping the destiny of millions? There is a secret hidden within the pages of Scripture, a little explored verse that may hold the answer to one of the greatest questions of our time. A forgotten prophecy sheds light on the reason behind so much pain, struggle, and division. What if these conflicts weren't solely human, but reflections of something greater, written thousands of years ago? In this video, you'll be challenged to look beyond the headlines and explore a truth that few dare to confront. Stay with me until the end, because I guarantee that after watching this video, you will see the conflicts in the Middle East from a new perspective. Throughout history, Islamic countries appear trapped in an endless cycle of conflict. The complexity of these wars goes far beyond politics and economics, rooted in spiritual and historical issues that date back to biblical times. But could this constant turmoil actually be a reflection of a biblical prophecy? This unsettling question leads us to examine whether the Bible foretold the troubled nature of this region and the role of Ishmael's descendants on the global stage. The Middle East is often described as a powder keg. From the disputes between Sunnis and Shiites to the tensions between Arabs and Israelis, the region pulsates with historical and spiritual rivalries. These divisions are not merely modern, they have deep roots in biblical narratives. The reference to Ishmael as someone whose hand will be against everyone resonates almost as a timeless echo, reverberating in the conflicts that continue to shake the Islamic world today. At the heart of this issue lies an enigmatic promise recorded in Genesis 16:12. He will be a wild donkey of a man, his hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. This description of Ishmael, Abraham's firstborn, not only sheds light on his personality, but also seems to frame the trajectory of his descendants. The prophecy, it seems, transcends the individual and encompasses the nations that would arise from him. The religious rivalries within the Islamic world, such as the disputes between Sunnis and Shiites, reflect this prophesied spirit of conflict. These internal divisions date back to the succession of Muhammad and, intriguingly, seem to reinforce the pattern foretold in the divine promise made to Ishmael. After all, isn't it striking that even those who share the same faith engage in such fierce wars among themselves? It's as though the prophecy manifests not only in external conflicts, but also in the internal tensions of Ishmael's descendants. Moreover, the relations between Arabs and Israelis draw a direct parallel to the biblical narrative. The promise made to Ishmael coexists with the covenant established with Isaac, fueling disputes that extend beyond territorial boundaries. These tensions can be seen as an extension of sibling rivalries, projected onto the histories of entire peoples. It's impossible to ignore how these issues shape the modern landscape, with Ishmael standing as a central figure in this intricate story. Even so, what makes it all the more fascinating is how Scripture seems to provide a spiritual backdrop for these issues. Ishmael's hand against everyone and everyone's hand against him can be interpreted not merely as physical conflict, but also as a struggle for identity, power, and survival. The war in Syria, tensions in Palestine, and even the geopolitical disputes among Islamic nations appear to reinforce this narrative. This prophecy from Genesis, in some way, remains alive, shaping not only religious perception but also global politics. Ishmael emerges as a symbol, a reminder that the roots of modern conflict are deeply buried in history. But what about the origins of this rivalry? To understand better, it is essential to delve into the narrative of Hagar, Ishmael, and the divine promise that started it all. The story of Hagar and Ishmael begins in a context of desperation and hope, marked by the cultural and spiritual pressures of the time. Hagar, an Egyptian servant of Sarah, Abraham's wife, was offered as an alternative to fulfill the divine promise of a blessed lineage. This practice, common in ancient Mesopotamia, brought inevitable tensions, especially when Hagar conceived Ishmael, Abraham's firstborn. The pregnancy, far from being a peaceful solution, sparked jealousy and conflict within the family, reflecting a power dynamic that would echo through generations. Ishmael was born into this charged atmosphere, and his life was marked by a mix of rejection and promise. The Bible describes him as a wild donkey of a man, an untamed figure symbolizing the resilience and independence of his lineage. However, this description also carries a forewarning of future conflicts, both internal and external. The connection between Ishmael and the Arabs is not only genealogical but also spiritual, shaping a collective identity that would defy time and adversity. The relationship between Ishmael and Isaac, Abraham's sons, encapsulates a rivalry that transcends the familial sphere. While Isaac was chosen as the heir of the divine covenant, Ishmael received his own blessing but was distanced from the central circle of the promise. This separation symbolizes a divergence of destinies that would unfold into conflicts between their descendants, perpetuating the division between Arabs and Israelites. It is fascinating how these ancient stories continue to influence modern cultural and political perceptions. Even in his rejection, Ishmael was not forgotten by God. In Genesis 17:20, God promised to make him into a great nation, blessing his descendants with strength and prominence. This promise is significant because it recognizes the importance of Ishmael and his lineage in the divine narrative. Historically, Arab peoples emerged as great civilizations, contributing cultural, scientific, and spiritual advancements that shaped the world. The blessing, therefore, is evident in both the grandeur and the complexity of their history. Rejection, however, left deep scars. Ishmael and Hagar's exclusion from life with Abraham and Sarah symbolizes the struggle for acceptance and place, both in the biblical context and in later history. This experience of marginalization is a recurring theme among Ishmael's descendants, who have often faced challenges in asserting their identity and claiming their place on the global stage. This spiritual and historical background is essential for understanding the tensions that still permeate the Middle East today. The descendants of Ishmael inherited not only his blessing, but also his struggle. The promise of a great nation was accompanied by a journey filled with challenges, marked by the need to survive amidst adversity. The narrative of Hagar and Ishmael is, above all, a story of resilience and faith, where a mother and son found the strength to overcome rejection and start anew. This resilience has become a symbol for subsequent generations. Delving into the origins of this rivalry, it is impossible not to see parallels with the current dynamics in the Middle East. Hagar, Ishmael, and Isaac are not merely figures of the past. Their stories are reflections of disputes and hopes that continue to shape the present. Ishmael's connection to Islam is one of the foundational pillars of the religion, revealing a historical and spiritual link between the Arab peoples and biblical promises. In Islamic tradition, Ishmael is considered the direct ancestor of Muhammad, the prophet of Islam, reinforcing the narrative that the blessing promised to Ishmael was not confined to his lifetime. For Muslims, Ishmael is a symbol of faith and submission to God, values that define the essence of Islam. It is intriguing how the story of a rejected son became the foundation of a great spiritual tradition. According to Islamic texts, Ishmael and his father Abraham played a central role in building the Kaaba, the sanctuary in Mecca that is the heart of Islamic faith. This narrative reinforces the idea of Ishmael as a link between biblical and Islamic traditions, solidifying his status as a spiritual patriarch. Ishmael's importance goes beyond genealogy. He is seen as a model of obedience, especially in the episode where he was willing to be sacrificed by his father in response to a divine command. This story, with its variations across Jewish, Christian, and Islamic traditions, underscores his theological significance. The emergence of Islam in the 7th century AD introduced a new chapter to Ishmael's lineage. Muhammad, as a descendant of Ishmael, cemented the role of his ancestors as central figures in the spiritual history of the Middle East. Under his leadership, the Arab tribes were unified into a religion that rapidly expanded, encompassing vast territories and shaping entire cultures. This direct connection to Ishmael is often cited as a source of spiritual legitimacy for Islam, highlighting the continuity of divine promises made to Abraham. However, the unity achieved under Muhammad was not sustained after his death in 632 AD. The prophet's succession gave rise to a bitter division between Sunnis and Shiites, a schism that persists to this day. Sunnis, who comprise the majority of Muslims, believed in the election of leaders as Muhammad's successors, while Shiites argued that succession should be hereditary, passing through the descendants of Ali, Muhammad's cousin and son-in-law. This dispute was not merely political but also spiritual, intensifying rivalries among different groups within Ishmael's lineage. These internal divisions, often violent, illustrate an intriguing paradox. While Islam seeks total submission to God and unity among the community of believers, its historical foundations are deeply marked by conflict. The promises made to Ishmael that he would become a great nation are reflected in Islam's global influence, but also in the fragmentation of its peoples. These internal conflicts prompt us to question how the biblical prophecy of Ishmael, as someone who would live in conflict with everyone, continues to manifest in the modern world. On the other hand, Ishmael's role as a central figure in Islamic tradition also highlights an interesting convergence with biblical narratives. While there are significant differences between the traditions, the mutual recognition of Ishmael as an ancestor of numerous and spiritually significant peoples establishes a foundation for interfaith dialogue. Ishmael's story transcends disputes, offering a bridge between Jews, Christians, and Muslims, even though this bridge is often obscured by centuries of misunderstandings. Thus, Ishmael continues to shape both the spiritual identity and the political dynamics of the Islamic world. The rivalry between Arabs and Jews is one of the oldest and most complex in history, tracing back to biblical times. The roots of this conflict are closely tied to the figures of Ishmael and Isaac, two brothers whose destinies were separated by divine promises. Ishmael, regarded as the ancestor of the Arabs, and Isaac, the patriarch of the Israelites, symbolize two lineages bearing both blessings and disputes. These conflicts began as familial rivalries, but evolved into a legacy of cultural, religious, and territorial tensions that have spanned centuries. Since antiquity, territorial disputes in the Middle East have reflected the promises made to Ishmael and Isaac. The Promised Land, given by God to Abraham and his descendants, became a focal point of contention among the peoples who claimed this inheritance. Wars such as those waged by David and Solomon against neighboring peoples, often associated with Ishmael's lineage, exemplify how this rivalry manifested in armed conflicts. It is fascinating how biblical texts narrate these disputes, intertwining historical events with profound spiritual significance. The rise of Islam in the 7th century introduced a new dynamic to these tensions. After the Muslim-Arab conquest of Palestine, territories traditionally linked to the Israelites came under the rule of Ishmael's descendants. This shift in power not only altered the political balance, but also deepened the religious divide. The region became a space of coexistence and conflict among three major traditions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, each claiming its connection to Abraham and the divine promises. However, it was in the 20th century that the rivalry between Arabs and Jews reached a critical point. The creation of the State of Israel in 1948 triggered a wave of resistance across the Arab world, which viewed the establishment of the country as a threat to its identity and territorial rights. From that moment, conflicts such as the Arab-Israeli wars and the Palestinian struggle for statehood solidified Ishmael's narrative as a symbol of Arab resistance. Territorial issues became the core of the dispute, while the spiritual roots of the conflict were often relegated to the background. The Palestinian issue is undoubtedly one of the most striking expressions of this rivalry. For many, the suffering of the Palestinian people reflects the legacy of Ishmael, someone who faced rejection and constant struggle, but also persevered. The descendants of Ishmael, in claiming their historical and spiritual heritage, have often faced challenges that put them in direct conflict with the Israelites, heirs to the promise made to Isaac. This complex and emotionally charged narrative continues to shape the perceptions and actions of both sides. The symbolism of Ishmael and Isaac transcends territory and resonates in global religious and political debates. While Jews see the Promised Land as a sacred inheritance, many Arabs view their struggle as a continuation of the blessing promised to Ishmael. This clash of perspectives fuels a rivalry that is as spiritual as it is geopolitical, making it nearly impossible to separate faith from politics in the Middle East. The two lineages, intertwined by history, continue to search for ways to coexist despite immense challenges. This clash of perspectives feeds a rivalry that is deeply spiritual and geopolitical. But is this intense dispute merely a human battle, or does it echo biblical prophecies that continue to shape the destinies of entire peoples? Perhaps the answer lies in Scripture, where ancient predictions point to the impact of Ishmael's promises on today's global stage. The conflicts plaguing the Middle East today seem to carry an unsettling echo of prophecies from thousands of years ago. The description of Ishmael in Genesis 16:12 comes to life strikingly when observing the region's instability. From civil wars to territorial confrontations and fragile geopolitical alliances, every movement seems to fulfill a script already outlined in the pages of Scripture. Syria's case is particularly symbolic. This country, historically a crossroads of cultures and religions, has become the epicenter of a devastating war involving internal factions and international interventions. Tribes, nations, and even superpowers find themselves locked in conflict, like pieces on a global chessboard. For scholars, this scenario reflects Ishmael's prophecy, an unending cycle of conflict transcending borders, with spiritual and cultural descendants living under the shadow of inescapable disputes. Every bomb dropped and every broken truce seems to scream the truth of ancient words. The war between Israel and Hamas, in turn, is a living portrait of the tension between the lineages of Ishmael and Isaac. It is not just a fight over territory, but also over identity, legacy, and survival. For many Arabs, Ishmael is a symbol of resistance, an ancestor whose blessings continue to guide their struggle against what they perceive as usurpation. On the other side, Israel asserts its own connection to the divine promises made to Abraham, viewing its existence as a fulfillment of these covenants. It is as if the war is more than earthly, a continuation of spiritual battles that began within a family thousands of years ago. Beyond armed battles, global terrorism has become one of the darkest faces of the conflicts associated with the descendants of Ishmael. Extremist groups, acting in the name of distorted ideals, have turned the Middle East into a landscape of fear and uncertainty. Many argue that these acts do not represent Ishmael's true legacy, but it is undeniable that such actions perpetuate the image of a region in constant turmoil. It is as though everyone's hand truly is against everyone else, in a cycle that seems endless. Geopolitics also plays a crucial role in this ongoing drama. Nations that historically share common origins often find themselves divided by artificial borders created by colonial powers. These divisions have deepened rivalries rooted in biblical narratives. Every resource dispute, every broken alliance, and every military escalation seems to reinforce the fulfillment of prophetic words. For Ishmael's descendants, the greatness promised by God comes with nearly insurmountable challenges, as though destiny continuously tests them. Scholars often reflect on the weight of these prophecies and their connection to current events. Many question whether the conflicts in the Middle East are merely the result of human choices, or if something deeper is at work. Were the words about Ishmael merely a reflection of his personality, or do they mirror the destiny of his descendants? This question is not just theological but historical, as the prophecy seems to shape both the spiritual narrative and the behavior of nations. And so the most compelling question arises, is there a way to break this cycle? God's promise to Ishmael included greatness and blessing, yet the conflicts seem to have overshadowed this part of the prophecy. If today's wars and tensions bear the mark of ancient pronouncements, perhaps the key to the solution also lies hidden in Scripture. Could it be possible to find, within the promises made to Ishmael, a seed of hope capable of transforming the future? Amid the wars, disputes, and chaos that seem to define the Middle East, a forgotten but profoundly significant promise emerges: God's blessing to Ishmael. In Genesis 17:20, God declared that Ishmael would be blessed and become a great nation. This prophecy, often overshadowed by conflict, carries immense potential for understanding the role of his descendants and perhaps glimpsing a future of reconciliation and hope. Historically, the Arab peoples, descendants of Ishmael, have left a cultural, scientific, and spiritual legacy that transformed the world. During the Islamic Golden Age, While Europe was plunged into darkness, the cities of the Arab world were centers of knowledge and innovation. Mathematics, medicine, philosophy, and astronomy flourished under their leadership. These achievements are a direct reflection of the blessings promised to Ishmael, demonstrating that his lineage is not solely marked by conflict, but also by remarkable contributions to humanity. Nevertheless, the weight of prophecy continues to loom over his descendants. The greatness promised to Ishmael seems to come with unique challenges, as though the same destiny that elevated his lineage also tests its resilience. In the biblical narrative, Ishmael symbolizes both struggle and endurance, and these traits are reflected in the nations that arose from him. Every technological or cultural advancement is often overshadowed by wars and tensions, perpetuating the paradox of blessing and challenge. For Jews and Christians, the reconciliation between the lineages of Ishmael and Isaac carries profound spiritual significance. The biblical story reveals moments when both brothers came together again, most notably at the death of Abraham, when Ishmael and Isaac reunited to bury him. This powerful image of reconciliation points to the possibility of peace, suggesting that rivalries do not have to be eternal. For many, the promise of blessing to Ishmael also includes the hope for a less divided Middle East. From the Islamic perspective, Ishmael is seen as a symbol of faith, submission, and obedience to God. These values can serve as a foundation for interfaith dialogues aimed at finding common ground between the different traditions that share Abraham as their patriarch. The pursuit of reconciliation is not merely political, but deeply spiritual, involving both the descendants of Ishmael and those of Isaac. Perhaps the key lies in rediscovering the promises made to both and using them as a cornerstone for mutual understanding. The Middle East, despite its deep wounds, remains a land of immense spiritual and cultural potential. The promise made to Ishmael that he would become a great nation still resonates in the hearts of many seeking meaning amid hardship. The legacy of resilience, creativity, and faith among his descendants is proof that the prophecy is not confined to conflicts. There is something greater at play, a vision of reconciliation that could redefine the history of this region so deeply scarred by pain. If you've made it this far, it's because this topic has touched you. What if I told you that the roots of the Middle East's conflicts are just one piece of a much larger puzzle? We've explored the promises made to Ishmael, but there's another crucial point to this story: the origin of Syria in the Bible and the ominous prophecies surrounding this nation and its future in the Middle East. Did you know that Scripture speaks of Syria's downfall and its impact in prophecies that seem to echo modern events? It's a topic that will leave you intrigued and perhaps a little unsettled. Want to understand how it all connects to today's events? Then don't miss our video, The Origin of Syria in the Bible and the Ominous Prophecies for the Middle East. Click now to watch and dive even deeper into this journey of spiritual and historical discovery.